There is a voice inside you that is already creating your financial reality, and it has never stopped working. Not for a single hour, not during sleep, not during prayer, not during the moments when you were most certain you were thinking positively. This voice is not the one you use in conversation. It is not the one you hear yourself use when you speak to others about your goals or your faith. It is the deeper voice, the one that runs beneath your words like a hidden current beneath a calm surface. It is the voice of your assumptions. It is the vocabulary of your private verdict about money, about supply, about what you deserve, about what is possible for someone like you. Joseph Murphy, who spent his life studying the architecture of the subconscious mind, understood something that most people never fully absorb. The subconscious mind does not evaluate your stated intentions. It does not reward your effort or your sincerity. It records what is repeated with feeling, and it builds accordingly. If that inner voice has been speaking lack, if it has been quietly reciting the sentence that says there is never enough, that money does not stay, that nothing works, then the subconscious has been faithfully executing that instruction every single day, and the conditions of your financial life are the exact result. You already know the language of prosperity. You have spoken it. You have repeated affirmations, perhaps for years. You have read the books and understood the principles. You have sat in the quiet of morning and spoken words of abundance with as much sincerity as you could gather. And yet, when you walk through the rest of your day, when the bill arrives, when the account is lower than expected, when the opportunity falls through, there is a different voice that rises. It does not announce itself as a contradiction. It sounds like common sense. It sounds like honesty. It sounds like simply being realistic. And it says, I cannot afford this. Money never stays with me. Nothing I try ever works. I do not know how to change this. These are not passing thoughts. They are the inner speech that runs for hours, repeated in fragments throughout the day, reinforced by frustration, cemented by habit. And according to the science that Murphy devoted his life to, these are the statements that dominate, not because they are true, but because they are the ones that carry the most emotional repetition. The pain that brings you to this teaching is precise. It is not ignorance. It is a specific and maddening gap. The gap between what you know and what you are living. You know the law. You have studied it long enough to explain it to others. You have felt moments of genuine faith, and still the financial conditions of your life have not matched the level of understanding you carry. That gap is not a sign that the law does not work. It is a sign that the law is working perfectly, but on a deeper track than the one you have been addressing. The voice you have been working on is the outer voice, the deliberate affirmation, the morning declaration. But beneath it, running all day, every day, narrating your financial reality with automatic and emotionally loaded precision, is the inner voice, and it has been the dominant signal. What Joseph Murphy promised is not an inspirational upgrade. It is a technical correction. He was not asking you to feel better about money or to adopt a more optimistic personality. He was identifying a specific mechanism, the subconscious mind's absolute obedience to the inner voice of accepted belief. And he was showing how to redirect that mechanism with surgical precision. The promise of this teaching is that the same voice that has been creating financial stagnation can be trained, corrected, and redirected to create something else entirely. The instrument does not change. The instruction changes. And when the instruction changes at the level of genuine subconscious acceptance, the creative process reverses. Murphy taught this not as hopeful speculation. He taught it as law. This video is a training. It is not a collection of motivational observations. It is a structured initiation into the mechanics of the inner voice and its relationship to the subconscious creation of financial reality. You will learn precisely what Joseph Murphy identified as the mechanism by which inner speech impresses the subconscious mind. You will learn to audit your current financial vocabulary without shame, without judgment, but with the cold clarity of a diagnostician reading a chart. You will be shown the specific errors of inner speech that cancel prosperity before it can take form. And you will be given the exact method by which the wealth voice is trained, calm, authoritative, and accepted at the level of subconscious conviction. Every section of this teaching builds on the one before it. This is not a collection of tips. It is a system. Before we enter the foundation of this law, there is one action you can take right now that is not merely symbolic. It is operative. Write the words, "I speak wealth into form," in the comments below. Not as a response, not as a sentiment, as a decree, as the first command issued from the new inner authority you are beginning to claim. Let that phrase be the first sentence of the new inner voice. And if you have not yet committed to this curriculum, if you arrived here by chance and are still deciding whether to remain, understand this. What is taught in this space builds on itself with the precision of a system. To receive it once is useful. To receive it in sequence as it accumulates is transformative. Remain in this laboratory. Subscribe so that this body of law reaches you as it unfolds. There is one more thing you should know before we proceed. Somewhere in part 4 of this teaching, we are going to reveal a specific sentence, one that millions of people speak every day, that sounds entirely practical, that feels like responsible honesty about money, yet which, when repeated habitually, functions as a precise command for scarcity. You may already be saying it. You may say it several times a day. Before we name it, you need to understand the mechanism deeply enough that when you hear it, you cannot unhear it. That is the purpose of everything that comes before that moment. Stay with this to the end. Joseph Murphy did not speak loosely about the subconscious mind. He was not using it as a poetic metaphor for a vague inner wisdom. He was describing a specific operational layer of the human mind, a deep processing system that does not argue, does not evaluate, does not apply logic, and does not distinguish between what is imagined and what is observed. The subconscious mind, as Murphy understood and taught it, is the creative medium through which every condition of your outward life is formed. It is the soil, and every idea repeated with emotional conviction is a seed planted in that soil. The soil does not decide which seeds to grow. It grows what is planted. That is its nature. That is its law. And the primary tool of planting, the instrument by which seeds of belief are introduced into the subconscious soil, is the inner voice. Not the voice of a single grand declaration, but the voice of persistent, emotionally saturated, daily inner speech. Murphy drew a sharp distinction between two types of mental activity. There is the activity of the conscious mind, deliberate, analytical, capable of reason and evaluation. And there is the activity of the subconscious mind, automatic, creative, absolutely responsive to what is accepted and repeated. The conscious mind is the architect. The subconscious mind is the builder. The builder does not question the blueprint. It executes it. This means that the quality of what is consistently repeated in the inner voice, especially with emotional weight, especially under the pressure of felt conviction, determines the blueprint the builder is working from at any given moment. A prosperity affirmation spoken once in the morning is a single line of instruction. The poverty narrative repeated with frustration, resignation, and weary certainty across 12 hours of the same day is an entire architectural document. And the builder reads the document, not the single line. This is the point Murphy returned to again and again, in different framings, across decades of teaching. He was not interested in occasional inspiration. He was interested in what dominated. What dominated the subconscious was not what was said most loudly, or most eloquently, or even most sincerely. What dominated was what was accepted. And acceptance in Murphy's system is a specific condition, a state in which the statement feels true, not hoped for, not desired, felt as present reality. This is the reason an affirmation spoken without conviction produces no lasting change. The subconscious does not record the words. It records the feeling behind them. If you say, "I am prosperous," while feeling broke, the subconscious receives the feeling, not the phrase. The feeling is the real instruction. The words are merely the carrier. This is also why Murphy placed such extraordinary emphasis on what he called relaxed faith, a state of calm inner certainty in which the prosperity statement is spoken not as a wish or a demand, but as a recognition of a truth already established in the invisible. When the statement feels like remembering rather than reaching, the subconscious receives it as accepted belief. And accepted belief is the seed that takes root, This principle, the relationship between inner speech, feeling, acceptance, and subconscious creative activity, is the entire foundation of the Wealth Voice teaching. Everything else in this method is an application of this single mechanism. The inner voice is not merely how you talk to yourself. It is the instrument by which you impress instructions into the most powerful creative medium in the known universe, the subconscious mind connected to infinite intelligence. Murphy did not speak of the subconscious in isolation. He consistently described it as the individual's point of contact with what he called infinite intelligence, the universal creative power that responds to subconscious impressions with perfect accuracy and without limitation. The subconscious mind, in Murphy's understanding, is not a closed system operating on stored memories alone. It is an open channel, the personal interface with a universal creative principle that knows no shortage, no obstacle, and no delay except those introduced by the impressions it receives. When the inner voice impresses lack upon the subconscious, the channel to infinite intelligence carries the signal of lack. When the inner voice impresses supply, with acceptance, with calm conviction, with the feeling of present reality, the channel carries supply. The universal principle does not judge the request, it fulfills the impression. This is the operative mechanism. This is the law. Therefore, the question of your financial life is not ultimately a question about the economy, your history, your education, your connections, or your circumstances. It is a question about what is currently dominating the inner channel. What has your inner voice been repeating with emotional conviction? What is the subconscious soil currently saturated with? What blueprint is the builder currently executing? These are not rhetorical questions. They have precise, identifiable answers. And the next sections of this teaching will give you the method to discover them, to correct them, and to replace them with the inner speech of prosperity, spoken with the calm authority of accepted law. This is not motivation. This is mechanism. And mechanism does not fail when it is correctly understood and correctly applied. Understanding the mechanism intellectually is the beginning, but Murphy was insistent that intellectual understanding alone does not impress the subconscious. The subconscious is not moved by argument, it is moved by repetition, feeling, and acceptance. A person can understand every principle in this teaching and still fail to change their financial reality if the understanding remains entirely in the conscious mind, if it never descends into felt conviction, never becomes the emotional temperature of daily inner speech. This is the most precise failure point in the application of Murphy's system. The knowledge stays at the level of the thinker when it must descend to the level of the deep mind. The Wealth Voice practice you will encounter in this teaching is specifically designed to make that descent, not by force, not by urgency, but by the patient, authoritative repetition of accepted truth. Murphy also taught that the subconscious mind is particularly receptive at specific moments, the threshold states between waking and sleep, and between sleep and full waking consciousness. In these liminal moments, the critical faculty of the conscious mind is relaxed, and impressions pass more freely into the subconscious soil. This is not mystical speculation. It is a structural feature of the mind that anyone can verify by noticing how powerfully the thoughts that visit them just before sleep affect the quality of their sleep and the tone of the morning that follows. Murphy prescribed the deliberate use of these threshold states for prosperity programming, a practice that will be described in detail in the architecture section of this teaching. For now, understand this foundational truth. The subconscious mind is always receiving, always recording, always creating. The only question is what it is receiving, what it is recording, and therefore what it is creating. The voice that creates money is not extraordinary. It is not a gift given to a few. It operates in every human being, without exception, 24 hours a day. The question is never whether it is operating. It is always operating. The only question is whether it is being used with awareness and directed with authority, or whether it is being allowed to run on the automatic pattern of old impressions, habitual fears, and inherited beliefs about what is possible. Murphy's great gift to the world was not the discovery of this mechanism. He was clear that he was drawing from ancient wisdom as much as modern psychology. His gift was the clarity, precision, and accessibility with which he taught ordinary people how to take conscious authority over the instrument they already possessed. and redirect it toward the financial and material conditions they genuinely desired. That teaching begins with the inner voice, and it begins right now. The subconscious mind, Murphy emphasized repeatedly, has no sense of humor and no capacity for irony. When you say, "I am always broke," as a joke, as a casual, self-deprecating acknowledgement of your financial frustration, the subconscious does not register the social context. It does not note that you are being ironic. It records the statement, especially when repeated regularly and accompanied by the emotional charge of genuine frustration or resignation, and it files it as instruction. This is not a metaphor. This is the operative principle of how the deep mind works. The subconscious is the most obedient servant imaginable, and its obedience is its most misunderstood quality. Most people think of obedience as a virtue. In the context of a subconscious that has been fed years of poverty language, obedience is the mechanism of stagnation. Change the language, change the impression, change the instruction. The servant will execute the new instruction with exactly the same faithfulness with which it has been executing the old one. For many people reading these principles for the first time, or even the 100th time, there arises a natural objection. If the subconscious is so powerful and so obedient, why does positive affirmation so often seem to produce no result? Murphy anticipated this question precisely, and his answer is the key to everything that follows in this teaching. Positive affirmation produces no lasting result when it is not accepted by the subconscious as true. And it is not accepted as true because the counter signal, the existing emotional belief embedded in the inner voice, is stronger. A single stated affirmation, spoken against a background of persistent inner doubt, is overruled. It is not that the affirmation failed, it is that it was never accepted. And what was never accepted was never impressed. And what was never impressed was never created. The mechanism is perfect. The application was incomplete. Murphy used the analogy of planting a seed in soil that is frozen. The seed is real. The principle of growth is real. But the condition of the soil prevents germination. The frozen soil in Murphy's analogy is the subconscious mind saturated with old impressions of lack. You can plant prosperity seeds on the surface of frozen soil indefinitely, and nothing will grow. Not because the law does not work, but because the condition of the soil prevents the seed from reaching the creative principle within it. The solution is not to plant better seeds or more seeds. The solution is to thaw the soil. And the soil is thawed by the sustained, emotionally patient, conviction-saturated repetition of the new impression. Not in a single heroic session, but consistently, across the day, across sleep, across the threshold states where the soil is most receptive. This is the practice. This is the method. This is the law applied correctly. Therefore, when Murphy spoke of prosperity prayer or prosperity affirmation, he was not describing a performance. He was describing a process of re-impression, a systematic replacement of the dominant inner signal. Not by fighting the old signal, not by arguing with the poverty voice, not by suppressing it through willpower, but by introducing the new signal with sufficient repetition, feeling, and calm authority that it gradually becomes the dominant impression. Just as a radio signal that is stronger drowns out a weaker one on the same frequency, the new inner voice, when it is consistently fed with emotional conviction and patient repetition, eventually dominates the subconscious recording. And when it dominates, the creative process of the subconscious begins to work from the new blueprint. Not eventually, not someday, but as an immediate consequence of the law that says, the subconscious creates in correspondence with its dominant impression. Murphy's work stands apart from casual motivational teaching precisely because he refused to leave the principle at the level of inspiration. He insisted on going all the way down to the mechanism, to the specific mental state required, the specific language to use, the specific timing and repetition that produces genuine impression. He was, in this sense, not a preacher of positive thinking. He was an engineer of the inner world. And the engineering he described was not complicated, it was precise. Precision, in Murphy's system, is not the use of sophisticated language or complex ritual. It is the use of simple, accepted, emotionally alive inner speech, directed consistently toward the desired reality with the calm certainty of a person who understands the law. That precision is what we are building toward in every remaining section of this teaching. Consider the architecture of a recording studio. When a musician enters a studio to record a vocal track, the process is not random. The microphone is positioned with precision. The acoustics of the room are controlled. The recording medium captures everything that enters, not what the engineer intended to capture, but what actually arrives at the microphone with sufficient signal strength. If there is a loud background noise running continuously in the room, and a quiet, beautiful melody is played for a few moments, the recording will contain both. But when the final track is played back, it is the loudest, most persistent signal that dominates. The melody may be present, but the noise drowns it. The subconscious mind operates by an identical principle. It is the recording medium. The inner voice is the microphone. And whatever arrives at that microphone with the greatest frequency and emotional intensity is what the recording captures as its dominant track. This analogy is not merely poetic. It carries the full weight of Murphy's teaching precisely because it captures the relationship between signal strength and result. Most people who have practiced prosperity thinking have focused entirely on the quality of the deliberate track they are laying down. The affirmation, the visualization, the prayer. They have made that track as beautiful and as carefully constructed as they know how. But they have not attended to what else is being recorded. They have not walked through their day noticing the continuous background signal of their habitual inner speech about money. They have not asked themselves, how many times today did I think or whisper something that contradicted what I said in my morning affirmation? And the answer, if they were honest, would be many times, perhaps dozens, perhaps in the worst cases, nearly continuously. It follows that the battle for financial reality is not won or lost in the 5 minutes of deliberate affirmation. It is won or lost across the entire span of the waking day. In every casual thought about a bill, every resigned sigh about an expense, every self-referential joke about being short on funds, every automatic inner monologue that rehearses the history of financial failure. These are not neutral mental events. Each one is a recording. Each one is a signal sent to the most obedient creative medium in existence. And their aggregate signal, their combined frequency and emotional intensity across an entire day, is what dominates the subconscious recording. Not the 5 minutes, the hours. This is not a failure of character. It is a failure of awareness, and awareness is correctable. The moment you understand that every inner sentence carries weight, that the subconscious is always recording, always receiving, always building from whatever it has been most persistently given, the entire framework of your relationship with inner speech changes. You stop being a passive receiver of your own habitual thoughts. You become what Murphy described as the watchman at the gate, the conscious guardian of what is allowed to repeat and take root. Not by suppression, not by white-knuckling positivity, but by the disciplined redirection of attention from the poverty narrative to the statement of divine supply. The watchman does not fight the noise. The watchman ensures that the signal being amplified is the one aligned with the desired result. Consider what happens in the body when a person is under chronic stress. The stress response is designed for temporary activation, a brief alarm, a focused response, and then a return to equilibrium. But when the mind rehearses threat continuously, when the inner voice replays financial danger, scarcity, and hopelessness on an automatic loop, the body does not distinguish between imagined threat and real threat. It responds to the signal with the same physiological urgency. Heart rate, breath pattern, muscle tension, hormonal levels, all shift in response to the inner narrative. The person walking through their day with an inner voice that whispers, "I cannot afford this," and "there is never enough," is, at the biological level, in a state of continuous low-grade alarm. And a person in continuous low-grade alarm does not perceive opportunities clearly, does not take bold action, does not follow through with confidence. The inner voice is shaping not only the subconscious creative process, but the moment-to-moment behavioral reality of the person living inside it. The converse is equally true and equally powerful. When the inner voice is systematically shifted toward the language of supply, abundance, divine guidance, and calm sufficiency, When that signal dominates the inner recording, the entire behavioral and perceptual apparatus of the person changes in correspondence. They begin to notice what they were too anxious to notice before. They begin to act with the confidence they had too much doubt to access before. They follow through where they previously retreated. They price their work correctly. They accept help they would once have deflected. They see the opportunity where previously all they could see was the obstacle. This is not a mystical intervention from outside. It is the natural behavioral consequence of a changed inner signal operating through a human being who is now moving in alignment with the conviction of supply rather than the conviction of lack. The logic therefore becomes irrefutable. If the subconscious mind is the creative medium, and Murphy taught this as law, not as metaphor, and if the subconscious receives its dominant impression from the inner voice, and experience confirms this when examined honestly, then the most leveraged point of change in any person's financial life is not their strategy, their network, their skills, or even their opportunity. It is the inner voice. It is the hidden signal being sent to the creative medium every waking hour. Change that signal genuinely, persistently, and with the calm authority of accepted conviction, and the medium begins to build a different world. The law does not care about your history. It does not weigh your past impressions as permanent. It responds to the current dominant signal, and the current dominant signal can be changed. This is the promise. And it is grounded in mechanism, not in hope. There is a second dimension to the recording studio analogy that deserves full examination. In a professional studio, there is a concept known as signal-to-noise ratio. This is the proportion of the desired signal to the unwanted background noise in a recording. The higher the signal-to-noise ratio, the cleaner the recording, the more the desired track dominates, and the more faithfully the recording medium captures the intended message. In the context of the subconscious mind, the prosperity statement is the signal. The habitual poverty narrative is the noise. Most people who practice affirmation have a very low signal-to-noise ratio, 1 or 2 deliberate prosperity statements against a background of continuous poverty noise. The recording captures noise. The subconscious builds from noise. Murphy's method is, at its essence, a discipline for increasing the signal-to-noise ratio, reducing the poverty noise through watchful redirection, and amplifying the prosperity signal through consistent, emotionally accepted repetition. This is why Murphy placed such emphasis on consistency over intensity. A single passionate prosperity declaration does not dominate years of embedded poverty language, but a patient, daily practice of speaking the language of divine supply, calmly, without desperation, with the settled authority of someone who understands the law, gradually shifts the ratio. Day by day, the signal grows stronger. Day by day, the noise loses its dominance. And at some threshold, a threshold that is different for every person but absolutely guaranteed by the law, the new signal becomes the dominant impression, and the subconscious begins to build from supply rather than from lack. This is not quick, it is not instant, but it is certain, because it is law. Consider also the nature of emotional intensity in this recording. Murphy did not mean that prosperity statements should be spoken with manufactured excitement or forced enthusiasm. He meant something far more precise and far more powerful. He meant that the statement should carry the emotional weight of genuine acceptance. The feeling he described was the feeling of a truth remembered, not a future desired, but a present recognized. When a person says, "Infinite intelligence prospers me now," and says it with the calm, settled feeling of someone who simply knows this to be true, in the same way they know their name or their address, the subconscious receives that statement as accepted reality. And accepted reality is the only kind that the subconscious acts upon with full creative power. The contrast with anxious affirmation is stark. When the same statement is spoken with desperation, with the urgency of someone trying to override a fear they can still feel, the subconscious receives the fear as the dominant emotional signal and the words as the attempt to disguise it. The recording captures the fear. The words are present, but they are overwhelmed by the emotional undertone. This is why Murphy was so insistent on the state of relaxed conviction, the mental and emotional condition in which a statement is spoken from the position of law, not from the position of need. This is not a subtle distinction. It is the difference between impressing the subconscious with supply and impressing it with the anxiety of lack. The words can be identical. The results are opposite. It follows from all of this that the discipline of the wealth voice is not primarily a verbal discipline. It is a discipline of inner emotional authority. The words are the carrier. The conviction is the signal. And conviction in Murphy's framework is not a feeling you force or manufacture. It is the natural emotional consequence of a mind that genuinely understands the law it is applying. When you truly understand, at the level where it has descended from the intellect into the bones, that the subconscious is always creating in response to the dominant impression, and that you are now deliberately supplying that impression with the language of divine supply, the conviction follows naturally. Not because you are excited, because you know. This is the precise mental state Murphy was cultivating in every person he taught. Not optimism, not enthusiasm, knowing. And knowing in Murphy's system is the most powerful force a human being can bring to bear on the mechanism of the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind also builds through what Murphy described as the law of correspondences, the principle that outer conditions correspond to inner impressions with mathematical precision. This is not a claim that you control external events by thinking about them. It is a claim that the inner state of accepted conviction opens specific channels of correspondence in the outer world. Opportunities appear, connections form, ideas arrive, decisions are made with a new clarity, and these outer correspondences are the subconscious mind working through the available channels to build in accordance with the dominant impression it holds. The outer world is not a separate system that you must convince or force. It is, in Murphy's understanding, the visible expression of the invisible impression. Change the impression with sufficient authority and acceptance, and the outer expression must eventually change in correspondence. Must. This is not poetry. This is the law of cause and effect applied to the domain of inner speech. Therefore, the voice that creates money is not a metaphor. It is not an inspirational framing. It is a description of an actual mechanism. The mechanism by which the inner speech of accepted belief impresses the subconscious mind, which in turn directs the creative power of infinite intelligence through the available channels of the outer world to build in correspondence with the dominant impression it holds. Every financial condition in your life right now, every pattern of prosperity or stagnation, every recurring ceiling or unexpected opening, is the visible evidence of what the inner voice has been impressing most persistently and most emotionally upon the most faithful and obedient creative medium in existence. This is what Murphy taught. This is what the remaining sections of this teaching will show you how to change. Before a single new prosperity statement is spoken, before any practice is adopted, before the wealth voice can be built, there is one capacity that must be developed. And it is the capacity most often skipped by people who are eager to move quickly to the technique. That capacity is watchfulness. Joseph Murphy understood that the inner voice, for most people, operates almost entirely below the level of conscious attention. It runs the way a familiar song runs in the background of a room, noticed only when you deliberately stop to listen, but present and operative throughout. The first requirement of the wealth voice practice is to stop and listen. Not to judge, not to correct immediately, but simply to become aware of what is actually running in the inner recording studio at the level of financial speech. You cannot redirect a current you have not yet noticed, and most people, when they first genuinely stop and listen to their financial inner voice, are surprised and sometimes shaken by what they hear. Watchfulness, in the context of Murphy's teaching, is not a passive state. It is an active and deliberate practice of self-observation without self-condemnation. This distinction is critical. The purpose of watching the inner voice is not to generate shame about what it has been saying. Shame itself is one of the most potent poverty signals the subconscious can receive. A deep, emotionally saturated conviction of unworthiness that the creative medium faithfully builds into outer conditions of limitation and lack. The purpose of watchfulness is diagnosis, not judgment. You are not cataloging your failures. You are identifying the current blueprint so that you can precisely replace it. A surgeon does not weep over the diagnosis. The surgeon studies it, locates the exact site of the problem, and proceeds with the instrument of correction. That is the spirit of this practice. To develop genuine watchfulness, you must create a deliberate interval of inner listening throughout the day. Not a lengthy meditation, simply a pause. A momentary withdrawal of attention from the outer world and a directing of it toward the inner dialogue. The question you are asking in that pause is specific. What have I been saying to myself about money in the last hour? Not what have I been thinking about in general. Specifically, what has the inner voice been narrating about supply, about shortage, about what is possible, about what I deserve, about what my financial future holds? Begin this practice without expectation. Simply collect the data. If the honest answer in those first days of watching is that the inner voice has been narrating lack, limitation, resignation, and fear, that is not a failure. That is a diagnosis. And a precise diagnosis is the beginning of every genuine correction. Murphy was deeply aware that many of the most persistent poverty sentences are spoken in the voice of practicality. They do not announce themselves as fear or as poverty belief. They announce themselves as maturity, as responsibility, as facing reality. I have to be careful with money. I cannot take that risk. I need to save every penny because I never know. I have always struggled with finances. These sentences do not feel like poverty programs. They feel like wisdom. And this is precisely what makes them so difficult to catch and so important to catch. The subconscious does not evaluate whether a statement is practical. It records it as instruction. I have always struggled with finances is not a mature acknowledgement of experience. It is a precise command to the creative medium. Continue struggling. And the creative medium, faithful as always, will continue to execute that instruction until a different one is accepted in its place. This is the particular quality of watchfulness that Murphy's system requires. A willingness to look at the financial language you have been treating as honest self-knowledge and to recognize it, instead as a subconscious program running on automatic. Not because the experiences it reflects were not real. They may have been very real. Financial hardship leaves deep impressions. Years of struggle create genuine patterns of belief. The honest observation of difficulty is not the problem. The problem is the translation of observed difficulty into permanent inner verdict. Money has been scarce is an observation. Money never stays with me is a verdict. And verdicts, when accepted by the subconscious as permanent truth, become the blueprint the builder executes without question. There is an additional layer to this watchfulness that Murphy would have recognized immediately. The inner voice does not only operate in full sentences, it operates in fragments, in tones, in the quality of the inner sigh that arises when the month end approaches, in the automatic tightening that occurs at the thought of an invoice or a bill, in the slight inner flinch at the price of something desired, in the wordless inner shrinkage that says, before the conscious mind has even formed a sentence, "This is not for me." These nonverbal inner events are also impressions. They also carry emotional signal. They also land in the subconscious soil as instructions. Part of the practice of watchfulness is developing sensitivity to these subtler forms of inner poverty speech, the ones that have no words but carry perhaps even more emotional weight than the verbal ones. Developing this sensitivity does not happen overnight. It is a practice, a patient, daily return to the inner ear, listening for what is actually running beneath the surface of your outer activity. Murphy did not promise that this would be comfortable. He promised that it would be accurate. And accuracy is what you need, because the inner voice that is creating your current financial conditions is not mysterious or hidden beyond your reach. It is available for examination the moment you decide to examine it. The discipline is simply in deciding, repeatedly, consistently, to look, to listen, to catch the automatic sentence before it sinks unexamined into the recording, and then, with the authority of someone who knows the law, to redirect it. The practice of watchfulness also reveals a second important truth about the inner voice. It is largely inherited. The financial language you speak to yourself was not invented by you. It was absorbed from parents, from community, from early experiences of witnessing how the adults around you spoke about money. If you grew up in an environment where "we cannot afford that" was spoken dozens of times a week, where money was discussed with anxiety, where financial struggle was treated as the natural condition of your people. That language was absorbed into the subconscious before you had any capacity to evaluate it. It is running now, not because you chose it, but because it was planted before the watchman was in place. This is not blame. This is architecture. And architecture, unlike character, can be rebuilt. Murphy's method does not require you to be a different person. It requires you to become, for the first time, the deliberate designer of your own inner speech, regardless of what was designed for you before you knew you had a choice. Watchfulness, therefore, is not only a preparatory stage, it is an ongoing practice, one that does not end once the wealth voice is established. It continues as the guardian function of the conscious mind, which Murphy described with the image of the watchman at the gate. The gate is the threshold between conscious and subconscious. The watchman's role is to ensure that nothing passes through that gate as accepted belief unless it is aligned with the desired inner program. In financial terms, this means that the watchman is specifically alert to poverty language, catching it before it completes itself and sinks into the soil, redirecting it toward the language of divine supply. And doing so not with alarm or effort, but with the calm, practiced authority of someone who knows the mechanism and knows their role in it. Becoming that watchman is the prerequisite for everything that follows. You cannot practice the wealth voice effectively while your inner voice runs unchecked in the background. The new signal will simply be absorbed into the noise. But once you have established the habit of watchfulness, once you are routinely catching the automatic poverty sentence and redirecting it with calm authority, the wealth voice practice gains power immediately because the noise has been reduced and the signal can now do its work with much less interference. The recording begins to change. The soil begins to receive a different seed, and the most faithful and obedient creative medium in existence begins with the precision of law to build a different world. One more aspect of watchfulness deserves particular attention before we move to the practice itself. The inner voice does not only operate in isolation, it operates in conjunction with memory. When the mind is not actively engaged, it tends to default to memory, rehearsing past financial experiences, replaying old stories of limitation, revisiting moments of failure or embarrassment about money. These memory rehearsals are not neutral mental events. They are present tense impressions. The subconscious does not experience the memory as past. It experiences it as current. When you replay a memory of financial humiliation with the full emotional intensity of the original experience, the subconscious receives a present tense impression of financial humiliation, and it builds accordingly. Part of the watchfulness practice is therefore developing the awareness to catch not only the verbal poverty sentence, but the habitual memory loop, the repeated mental return to financial failure stories, and to redirect that loop with the same calm authority brought to the redirecting of verbal inner speech. The redirecting of memory in Murphy's system is not suppression and not denial. It is replacement. When the mind begins to rehearse an old financial failure story, the watchman does not attempt to erase it. The watchman introduces the present tense statement of divine supply. Infinite intelligence prospers me now, and allows that statement, with its emotional weight of accepted conviction, to replace the emotional temperature of the memory loop. Over time, the habitual return to failure memory diminishes, not because it was suppressed, but because a stronger signal has taken its place. This is the inner economy of the wealth voice practice, not warfare against the old, but the patient, authoritative introduction of the new until the new dominates and the old fades for simple lack of reinforcement. This is what Joseph Murphy meant when he spoke of the prepared mind. Not an optimistic mind, not a forced positive mind, a watchful mind, a mind that has taken conscious responsibility for the inner speech it allows to run, the memories it allows to rehearse, and the emotional conclusions it allows to accept. The prepared mind is the soil that is ready to receive the seed of the wealth voice and let it germinate, take root, and grow into the outer expression of financial supply. Every section of the practice that follows assumes this prepared, watchful mind as its foundation. If that foundation is in place, the technique works with the certainty of law. If it is not, the technique is merely another affirmation practiced over unreformed background noise. Begin, therefore, with watchfulness. Begin today. The Wealth Voice practice is a system of 4 deliberate steps, each one building on the foundation laid by the previous one. It is not a collection of suggestions, it is a precise sequence, and its precision is the source of its power. Every step has a specific function in the process of impressing the subconscious with the dominant signal of divine supply. And every step must be applied with the understanding of the mechanism it is activating. What follows is not a casual guide to positive self-talk. It is the applied science of inner speech, drawn from Murphy's most direct and enduring teachings on the subconscious mind, prosperity prayer, and the creative power of accepted belief. The first step is the audit of the inner voice, and it flows directly from the watchfulness practice described in the previous section. Now, however, the watching is made explicit and deliberate. You are not merely noticing what runs in the background. You are conducting a formal inventory. Take a single day, or, if necessary, several days, and track the specific financial sentences that arise in your inner speech. Not the big existential statements, but the small, automatic ones, the phrases that emerge when you open a bill, the inner commentary that runs when you hear of someone else's financial success, the sentence you say to yourself when you look at your bank balance, the reflex that occurs when someone offers you an opportunity that costs money. Collect these without editing them. Write them if that helps. The purpose is precision. You are identifying the exact language that has been running the program that has been producing the current results. This audit, done honestly, will typically reveal several categories of financial inner speech. There will be the verdict sentences, the ones that make absolute declarations about your relationship with money. Money and I don't get along. I'm not the kind of person who has wealth. I'll always be struggling. These are the deepest programs because they have been accepted as identity, as statements of who you are rather than statements of what has been. Then there will be the scarcity sentences, the ones that report on shortage as a permanent condition. There is never enough. Something always takes the money. I can never get ahead. And there will be the helplessness sentences, the ones that close off possibility. There is no way. I don't know how to change this. It's too late for me. All of these are programs currently running in the subconscious. All of them are producing the financial results that correspond to their instruction, and all of them are candidates for the second step. The second step is the removal of poverty verdicts. This is not suppression, and it is not arguing with the negative thought. Murphy was clear that attempting to fight a negative belief by willpower tends to reinforce it. What you resist in the inner world, you energize. The method is substitution, not combat. When the audit reveals a poverty sentence, the practice is to allow it to surface into conscious awareness, to see it clearly and without shame, and then, immediately and calmly, to replace it with a statement of divine supply that carries the opposite instruction. The replacement is not a shouted overriding, it is a quiet, authoritative redirection. The tone is that of a teacher who has noticed an error in a student's calculation and is pointing, simply and precisely, to the correct figure. The specific language Murphy recommended for prosperity statements bears careful attention because it reflects his deep understanding of what the subconscious actually receives. He favored short, present tense, calmly authoritative phrases that referenced infinite intelligence as the source of supply. Infinite intelligence prospers me now. Money circulates freely in my life in divine order. I am guided to the right action at the right time. Divine supply fills every need as it arises. These are not motivational slogans. They are precise instructions to the subconscious designed to impress a specific reality. Not a wished-for future, but a present tense fact about the relationship between the individual and the universal creative principle. The phrase prospers me now is not accidental. The subconscious does not respond to future tense statements in the same way it responds to present tense ones. I will be prosperous plants a seed of future prosperity and simultaneously confirms a present lack. I am prospered now impresses present tense supply. This is the second step applied in practice. Every time the audit has identified a poverty sentence, a precise replacement statement is prepared and kept available. When the poverty sentence arises, and in the early days of the practice it will arise frequently, the replacement is spoken internally with calm authority. Not urgently, not anxiously, not with the emotional temperature of someone trying to convince themselves of something they do not believe, with the settled tone of someone who knows what they are doing and why they are doing it. This consistency, the same statement, calmly and repeatedly substituted in the place of the same poverty phrase, is what begins to shift the dominant impression. It does not shift it in a day, but it shifts it reliably and inevitably in the direction the law describes. The third step is the cultivation of what Murphy called subconscious authority in the speaking of the wealth voice. This is the quality of inner speech that does not request, does not plead, does not perform, and does not strain. It simply states. It speaks from a position of recognized law, the position of someone who knows that infinite intelligence is the source of all supply, that the subconscious is the channel through which that supply moves, and that the prosperity statement spoken in accepted conviction is the operative command that opens that channel. When you say infinite intelligence prospers me now with subconscious authority, you are not asking for something to happen. You are recognizing what is already the law. You are operating the mechanism, not petitioning it. This distinction between petitioning and operating is perhaps the most important shift in the entire practice. Petitioning the subconscious with a prosperity statement is a position of lack. It places the desired reality outside yourself, in a future you are hoping to reach. Operating the law through the prosperity statement is a position of authority. It places the desired reality in the present tense, in the accepted conviction of a mind that understands how the mechanism works. Murphy's teaching, throughout all his major works, was built on this distinction. Prayer for him was not asking, it was claiming. Not claiming in the sense of demanding, but claiming in the sense of recognizing, bringing into conscious acceptance the truth that infinite intelligence has already provided the substance of every good thing, and that the only thing required is the acceptance of that provision through the channel of the subconscious mind. The fourth step is the addition of the feeling of acceptance, and this is where many people's practice either deepens into genuine transformation or remains at the level of rote repetition. Murphy was absolute on this point. It is not the word that impresses the subconscious. It is the word backed by the feeling of acceptance. And the feeling of acceptance is not enthusiasm, not excitement, and not manufactured positivity. It is the specific inner state in which the statement feels true, in which there is, beneath the words, a quality of settled, quiet knowing. This is the state Murphy described when he spoke of relaxed faith. Not straining to believe, not hoping it is true. Resting in the recognition that it is true as a matter of law, because the law has been understood. To access this feeling, Murphy frequently recommended a brief relaxation of the body before speaking the prosperity statement. A few moments of deliberate physical stillness and mental release. The dropping of urgency, the loosening of the grip on the desired outcome. This relaxation is not indifference. It is the removal of the anxiety signal that would otherwise contaminate the inner speech with the emotional temperature of lack. From the position of physical and mental relaxation, the prosperity statement can be spoken with the quality of genuine acceptance. And when it is spoken from that position, the subconscious receives it clearly, without the interference of the anxiety noise, and records it as the dominant instruction. The full sequence of the practice therefore runs as follows. Watchfulness to identify the current poverty signal. Auditing to catalog the specific poverty phrases that dominate the inner recording. Substitution to replace each poverty phrase with a precisely constructed statement of divine supply. And the cultivation of subconscious authority, the calm, accepted, relaxed feeling with which the replacement statement is spoken. These four steps, applied consistently, change the dominant impression of the subconscious with the certainty of law. Not eventually, not hopefully, not if the universe cooperates, but inevitably, because the law is impersonal and the mechanism is exact. Murphy also specified the strategic use of a single chosen prosperity statement as the primary vehicle of the practice. While it is useful to have replacement statements for various poverty phrases, he recommended that each person identify one core statement, the one that resonates most deeply with their sense of their own relationship with divine supply, and use that statement as the central investment of the practice. Repetition concentrated on one accepted idea is vastly more powerful than repetition scattered across 20 different phrases. The subconscious responds to the depth of impression, not the breadth of vocabulary. One statement, repeated with genuine acceptance across weeks and months, creates a groove, a dominant impression that 100 statements spoken casually never could. Choose the statement that feels most like truth remembered and give it the weight of consistent, authoritative repetition. The full implementation of the Wealth Voice practice includes 2 specific moments each day that Murphy identified as critical to the effectiveness of the entire system. The first is the moment immediately before sleep. In the threshold state between waking and sleep, when the conscious critical faculty is relaxing its guard, the subconscious is maximally receptive. The prosperity statement spoken in this state, quietly, calmly, with the feeling of acceptance, passes into the deep mind with unusual clarity and power. Murphy recommended making this the last mental act of the day. The gentle, accepted repetition of the chosen prosperity statement continued until the mind drifts into sleep, carrying the impression of divine supply into the night. The subconscious does not sleep. It continues to work throughout the night on the last dominant impression given to it before the conscious mind surrendered its watch. Give it supply, give it abundance, give it the settled recognition of infinite intelligence as the operative source of all provision. The second critical moment is the first waking interval of the morning, the brief period before full conscious alertness arrives, before the day's concerns have rushed in, before the automatic financial narratives have begun their run. In this morning threshold state, the subconscious is again open with unusual receptivity. The first inner speech of the morning is not a casual event. It sets the emotional tone of the inner recording for the hours that follow. Murphy recommended using these first moments to speak the chosen prosperity statement with the same calm acceptance applied at night. To let the day begin not with the anxiety of unresolved financial concerns, but with the quiet authority of divine supply recognized. These 2 threshold moments, the last act before sleep and the first act in waking, frame the entire day within the signal of prosperity. And the day spent within that frame is a different day than the one spent within the frame of lack. After the morning statement, the practice of protecting the inner voice throughout the day comes into effect. This is the watchfulness practice in its ongoing application, the moment-by-moment catching of automatic poverty speech and the calm, consistent substitution of the wealth voice in its place. No single day of this practice will produce dramatic outer change, but each day deposits a further increment of the new impression into the subconscious soil. And the accumulation of those daily deposits, patient, consistent, authoritative, is the process by which the dominant inner signal shifts, the subconscious receives the new blueprint, and the creative correspondence between inner conviction and outer condition begins to move in a new direction. This is the practice. Applied with the understanding of the law it operates, it is not a practice of hoping or trying. It is a practice of building, with the precision and certainty of someone who knows exactly what they are constructing and why it must eventually stand. The first and most common error in the application of the wealth voice practice is one that Murphy identified with great precision in his teaching, and it is so widespread because it looks from the outside like genuine practice. It is the error of affirming wealth while simultaneously narrating poverty. This is the pattern of the person who speaks their morning prosperity statement with sincerity, then spends the next 12 hours giving a running commentary of financial lack to everyone who will listen. They tell their friends how tight things are. They tell their family how nothing is working. They rehearse the history of their financial struggle in conversations, with the emotional weight of someone who has lived through genuine hardship. And then at the end of the day, they say their evening prosperity statement and wonder why the subconscious is not responding. The mechanism here is not mysterious. The morning prosperity statement runs for perhaps 3 to 5 minutes. The poverty narrative runs for hours. In the recording studio of the subconscious, the prosperity statement is a clean, beautiful 3-minute track. The poverty narrative is a 12-hour ambient recording that dominates the medium entirely. The subconscious is not impressed by the quality of the 3-minute track. It is impressed by the dominant signal. And the dominant signal is, by an enormous margin, the one that has been running all day in every conversation, every inner replay, every casual complaint. Murphy was not suggesting that people pretend financial difficulty does not exist. He was insisting that describing it repeatedly and emotionally, turning it into the central narrative of the day, is an act of subconscious programming that overrides any amount of deliberate prosperity speech. The correction is not silence or dishonest performance of well-being. The correction is the discipline of narrative economy. Acknowledge the current condition when necessary. Address it practically. Take the steps that are available to take, but do not rehearse it. Do not retell it. Do not give it the emotional amplification of repeated, feeling-laden narration. The subconscious does not need you to acknowledge that money is scarce. It has been building that condition from your inner speech for years. What it needs is not more detailed confirmation of the current condition. What it needs is the persistent, accepted impression of the desired condition. Supply, sufficiency, divine provision, the opening of right channels. Give the 12 hours to that signal. Let the poverty narrative be reduced to what is necessary and practical, stripped of the emotional amplification that turns observation into program. This first error is particularly painful to examine because the poverty narrative often feels like genuine communication and connection. Talking about financial hardship with people who share it creates a sense of solidarity, of being understood. Murphy recognized this but was uncompromising about its cost. Every time the financial hardship is narrated with emotional intensity, even in a context of genuine human connection, the subconscious receives another impression of financial hardship as your defining reality. The law does not make exceptions for social context. The recording medium captures what arrives with signal strength and feeling, regardless of the social purpose it was serving. This is not a call to emotional isolation. It is a call to conscious awareness of the price of habitual financial complaint. A price paid not in social currency, but in subconscious programming. The second fatal error is one that Murphy addressed with particular compassion because he understood how natural it is and how difficult it is to detect. It is the error of speaking prosperity statements from a position of pressure, of urgency, anxiety, or desperation, rather than from the position of relaxed, accepted conviction. This is the person who has a financial crisis bearing down on them, who is acutely aware of the threat, and who speaks their prosperity statement with the emotional temperature of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, hoping the words will stop the fall. The words may be perfect. The statement may be precisely worded and drawn directly from Murphy's own teaching. But the subconscious does not hear the words. It hears the pressure. And pressure, in the language of the subconscious, is the signal of lack. The stronger the pressure with which the prosperity statement is spoken, the more clearly the subconscious receives the signal of the fear that is generating the pressure. This is one of the cruelest ironies of the inner voice. The moment of greatest financial urgency is the moment when it is most difficult to access the state of relaxed conviction, yet it is precisely the state of relaxed conviction that the law requires. Murphy did not minimize this difficulty. He acknowledged it honestly and repeatedly. His counsel was specific. In a moment of financial urgency, before attempting to speak the prosperity statement, take the deliberate step of releasing the urgency. Not by denying the difficulty, not by pretending the crisis does not exist, but by deliberately withdrawing attention from the crisis for a brief period, relaxing the body, breathing slowly, and returning to the foundational recognition that infinite intelligence, which is the source of all supply, is unaffected by the crisis. Then from that relaxed position, speak the statement. The subconscious receives a fundamentally different signal from the same words spoken under pressure versus the same words spoken from relaxed conviction. One signals lack, one signals supply. The law responds to the signal, not to the intention behind it. The third error Murphy identified, and one that is particularly common among people who have studied his work and similar teachings, is the scattering of prosperity language across too many statements, too many affirmations, Too many prayers, spoken at various times in various forms, none of them invested with consistent depth of repetition and acceptance. This is the person who has a notebook full of affirmations, 30, 40, 60 statements, who rotates through them with sincere diligence, but invests no single one of them with the depth of repetition and sustained acceptance that would allow it to genuinely dominate the subconscious impression. The subconscious is not impressed by quantity, it is impressed by depth. 30 affirmations, spoken once each, produce 30 shallow grooves in the subconscious soil, none of them deep enough to carry a seed to germination. One statement, spoken consistently for weeks with genuine acceptance, creates a groove of such depth that the seed reaches the creative level of the deep mind and begins to grow. Murphy's instruction on this point was entirely consistent across his body of work. Choose one statement, the one that resonates most deeply with you, the one that, when spoken with the quality of settled recognition, produces in you the feeling of a truth remembered rather than a wish expressed. Give that statement the full weight of your daily repetition. Invest it with the feeling of acceptance every time you speak it. Allow it to become the dominant thread of your inner financial speech. The sentence that, over days and weeks, replaces the habitual poverty phrase as the automatic inner response to financial situations. One statement, deeply accepted and consistently repeated, is more powerful than any library of affirmations spoken without the conviction of genuine acceptance. This is not a limitation. It is the recognition that depth creates the impression, and the impression creates the result. There is an important corollary to this error of scattered language, and it is the tendency to switch statements whenever the expected outer result does not appear quickly enough. This is the impatient gardener who plants a seed, waits 3 days for a tree, sees nothing, pulls up the seed, plants a different one, waits 3 more days, sees nothing, and cycles through an entire packet of seeds without allowing any single one the time and consistent conditions needed for germination and growth. Murphy's method requires patience, not the passive patience of someone waiting for something they have no confidence will arrive, but the active patience of someone who understands the law and knows that the law is operating even when its operation is not yet visible in the outer world. The inner shift precedes the outer manifestation. There is always a period in which the new impression is establishing its dominance before it is expressed in outer conditions. This period requires the steady, confident continuation of the practice. If you have been in the habit of switching statements and practices every few weeks because results did not appear, recognize this now as the pattern that guarantees continued stagnation. Not because the principles are wrong, but because the application was not sustained long enough for the subconscious impression to establish itself as dominant. Murphy was describing a law, not a technique, and the law operates on its own timetable, which is determined by how deeply and how consistently the new impression is established, not by how urgently you need the result. This recognition that patience is not resignation, but the correct relationship with a mechanism that operates according to its own inherent timing, is one of the most important adjustments the serious student of Murphy's work can make. In the briefing for this teaching, there was a promise made, a specific sentence that would be revealed at this point, a sentence that millions speak every day, that sounds entirely practical and responsible, that feels like honest self-awareness about money, yet that functions, when spoken habitually, as a precise subconscious command for scarcity. That sentence is, "I cannot afford it." Read those 4 words again and understand what happens when they are spoken with the full emotional weight of genuine conviction. Not once, not occasionally, but repeatedly, automatically, across years of financial experience. "I cannot afford it" is not merely a description of a current financial condition. It is a declaration, accepted, felt, repeated, and submitted to the most obedient creative medium in existence. It is a decree issued from the inner authority of the speaker, and the subconscious receives it precisely as that. The creative medium does not hear, "I currently lack the funds for this particular purchase." It hears, "I am a person for whom affordability is not available." And it builds that identity into the conditions of your financial life with mathematical precision. Murphy would have identified this phrase immediately as one of the most destructive members of the financial vocabulary. not because it is insincere or poorly intentioned, but because it is so habitually spoken, so emotionally saturated, and so universally accepted as simple honesty that it runs beneath the radar of every prosperity practice the person attempts. You can speak the most beautifully constructed prosperity affirmation at night and have said, "I cannot afford it," 14 times during the day, each time with the full emotional conviction of truth. Which signal dominates? The law answers, the one that was most frequently and emotionally repeated. Not the beautiful one, the habitual one. The replacement for this phrase is not a denial of current financial reality. It is the deliberate choice of language that does not seal the subconscious in a permanent identity of scarcity. When the automatic impulse is to say, "I cannot afford it," the practiced response is a redirection. "I choose wisely with the resources I have now." Or, "Divine supply is opening new channels for this need." Or simply, "Infinite intelligence guides my financial decisions." These replacements are not lies. They are not the pretense that money exists when it does not. They are the refusal to translate a temporary financial condition into a permanent subconscious identity. They are the language of a person who knows that the current condition is not the final verdict. That infinite intelligence, through the channel of the subconscious mind, has the capacity to open resources, channels, and ideas that are not yet visible from the current position. The final dimension of this refinement, the master's understanding that Murphy would have returned to with each student until it was fully absorbed, is the quality of the inner voice during the practice itself. Murphy used the phrase relaxed repetition in his teaching, and it captures something essential that the word practice alone can miss. Relaxed repetition is not the casual, disconnected repetition of someone going through the motions. It is the repetition of someone who is, in each instance of the statement, returning to the feeling of accepted truth. The word relaxed refers to the absence of anxiety, pressure, and urgency, the conditions that contaminate the prosperity signal with the emotional temperature of lack. The word repetition refers to the consistent, patient, day-after-day investment in the same statement. Together, they describe the precise inner quality that Murphy was cultivating, a practice that is neither anxious nor careless, but deeply present, calmly authoritative, and sustainedly committed. Speaking the prosperity statement should feel, Murphy said, like recognizing something you had briefly forgotten, not like demanding something you desperately need, not like performing a technique you hope will produce results, like the simple, quiet recognition of a truth that has always been present. The truth that infinite intelligence is the source of all supply, that the channel of the subconscious mind is always open, and that your inner speech, directed with calm acceptance toward the language of divine provision, is the operative command that aligns you with the supply that is already, in principle, yours. That feeling, quiet, settled, authoritative, without urgency or performance, is the correct inner posture for the wealth voice practice. And when it is consistently maintained, the impression it creates in the subconscious mind is, by the precise operation of law, the impression from which financial reality is built. What has been revealed in the preceding section about the phrase, "I cannot afford it," deserves to remain with you for a moment longer before we move forward. Consider how many times that phrase has been spoken in your life. Consider not just the times you said it aloud, but the times you said it inwardly, as the automatic first response to a bill, to a desire, to an opportunity, to a conversation about money. Consider the emotional weight that accompanied it, not merely the words, but the feeling, the slight inner contraction, the resignation, the weary acknowledgement of limitation. That feeling is the signal. That feeling, sent repeatedly to the most obedient creative medium in existence, has been building a very specific reality. Not because you intended it to, but because the law does not require intention, it requires impression, and you have, with absolute thoroughness, been impressing that reality for years. The replacements offered for this phrase are not mere word swaps. Each one is designed to introduce a fundamentally different inner relationship with supply. "I choose wisely" places you in the position of an agent of discernment rather than a victim of scarcity. Supply is unfolding, introduces the present tense recognition that the provision of infinite intelligence is a dynamic process, not a fixed condition. Divine intelligence opens the way, speaks to the channel of possibility. The recognition that what is not currently visible is not therefore absent, and that the creative power of the subconscious, aligned with infinite intelligence, has the capacity to open resources and channels that reason alone cannot predict. Each replacement is a precise redirection of the inner authority from scarcity to supply. Each one, spoken in place of the old phrase with genuine acceptance, deposits a different impression into the subconscious soil. The master's understanding of Murphy's prosperity method, the understanding he was working toward in every student, is that the wealth voice is not a technique you apply when things are difficult. It is the permanent inner architecture of a mind that has taken up residence in the recognition of divine supply. It is not a practice for moments of financial challenge. It is the natural language of a person who has fully absorbed the truth that infinite intelligence is the source of all supply, that the subconscious mind is the always open channel of that supply, and that the inner voice, speaking from accepted conviction, is the operative instrument of that channel. When this understanding is fully absorbed, when it has descended from the intellect into the bones, the poverty phrase does not arise, not because it has been suppressed, but because it has been replaced by a different identity, a different inner relationship with money, a different fundamental understanding of how supply works. This is the transformation Murphy was pointing toward, not the acquisition of wealth through repeated affirmation, but the reconstruction of the inner self's relationship with supply, from the identity of scarcity to the identity of a person through whom infinite intelligence prospers. That identity, once genuinely established in the subconscious, does not need to be practiced in the desperate sense. It is simply who you are. And the outer conditions of financial life gradually, inevitably, and with the certainty of law, align themselves with who the subconscious believes you to be. This is the master's level. It is not beyond you. It is precisely the level toward which every section of this teaching has been pointing. And the practice of the wealth voice, applied with patience, consistency, and relaxed conviction, is the path by which that level is reached. The teaching of the inner voice and its relationship to the subconscious mind does not exist in isolation from what psychology has observed about the nature of self-talk and its effect on human behavior, perception, and cognition. What Murphy described through the framework of spiritual law, modern psychological research has approached through the study of inner speech, cognitive priming, and what researchers describe as the behavioral consequences of habitual linguistic patterns. The convergence between these two bodies of understanding is not incidental. It reflects the same underlying reality approached from two different directions, one through the framework of spiritual mechanism, the other through the framework of empirical observation. Together, they create a picture of the inner voice that is both more precise and more compelling than either alone. Researchers who study inner speech, the internal monologue that runs continuously in the conscious experience of most people, have consistently found that the content and emotional quality of that inner speech is a powerful predictor of both mood and behavior. This is not a claim that thought controls reality in a metaphysical sense. It is a claim that what you habitually say to yourself influences how you perceive your circumstances, what options you notice as available, what actions you feel confident enough to take, and what you believe you deserve to receive. These are not trivial influences. They are the exact channels through which the outer financial reality of a person is shaped, not by mystical intervention, but by the straightforward behavioral consequence of a self-image and a set of perceived possibilities that have been constructed day by day by the habitual content of inner speech. Consider the mechanism of cognitive priming. When the mind is repeatedly exposed to a particular set of words, concepts, and emotional associations, it becomes primed to notice and respond to stimuli in the outer world that match those associations. A person whose inner voice is saturated with the language of scarcity, not enough, no options, can't afford, always struggling, is a person whose perceptual apparatus has been primed to notice evidence of scarcity and to overlook evidence of opportunity. This is not a character flaw. It is the natural operation of a primed perceptual system. The mind finds what it has been trained to look for, The opportunity that was present but invisible to the scarcity prime mind is the same opportunity that becomes visible the moment the priming shifts, when the inner voice begins, consistently and repeatedly, to speak the language of supply, of possibility, of divine guidance and open channels. This connection between inner speech, priming, and behavioral consequence is particularly relevant for the audience of this teaching. Experienced adults who have tried many things and wondered why the results did not match the effort. Part of the answer is in this mechanism. The outer efforts, the networking, the business attempts, the investments, the applications, were made by a person whose perceptual system had been primed by years of poverty inner speech to overlook certain opportunities, to underprice their work, to withdraw at the critical moment of follow-through, to deflect the compliment or the referral or the partnership that would have opened a door. These are not random failures. They are the consistent behavioral expressions of a consistent inner signal. And they are correctable not by working harder or by having better external strategies, but by changing the inner signal at the level where it governs perception and behavior. The research on confidence and self-efficacy, the inner belief in one's own capacity to take effective action, is equally instructive. Studies in this area consistently show that inner speech that emphasizes capability, sufficiency, and access to guidance produces higher rates of goal pursuit, follow-through, and adaptive problem-solving than inner speech that emphasizes limitation, scarcity, and helplessness. The person who says internally, "I am capable of finding a way through this," and the person who says, "there is no way through this," may have identical external resources, identical intelligence, and identical opportunity. But they will act differently. The first person will look for the path. The second person has already internally foreclosed the search. Murphy's prosperity language, infinite intelligence opens the right channels, I am guided to the right action, is not naive. It is precisely calibrated to produce the inner state of open, active, alert engagement with possibility that psychologically produces the best outcomes. The inner experience of what Murphy called relaxed conviction also has a clear psychological analog. In the literature on optimal performance and flow states, researchers have consistently found that the mental state most conducive to creative problem-solving, confident action, and genuine openness to new possibilities is characterized by calm alertness rather than anxious urgency. The person in a state of chronic financial anxiety is in a state of cognitive narrowing. The range of options they can perceive has been literally reduced by the stress response. The person in a state of calm confidence operates with a broader perceptual field, greater cognitive flexibility, and higher behavioral follow-through. Murphy's insistence on the state of relaxed conviction is not spiritually arbitrary. It describes the exact psychological state in which the human mind operates most effectively. The state in which opportunities are most visible, decisions are most clear, and actions are most likely to produce positive outcomes. There is also a direct psychological parallel to Murphy's teaching about the threshold states of sleep and waking. Research on memory consolidation and emotional processing during sleep confirms that the content of thought at the sleep threshold has a disproportionate influence on the emotional tone and cognitive orientation of the following day. The thoughts and feelings that are active as the mind enters sleep are processed more deeply during sleep than those encountered at other times of day. The morning thoughts, the first orientation of the waking mind, set a cognitive and emotional baseline that influences mood, motivation, and behavioral tendency throughout the hours that follow. Murphy's prescription to use these threshold moments for the deliberate impression of prosperity statements is not a spiritual exercise divorced from the mechanics of the mind. It is the precise targeting of the two moments each day when the mind is most receptive to deep impression, and when the impressions formed have the greatest downstream influence on the entire day. It is important to hold the psychological framework in its correct relationship to Murphy's spiritual teaching. The psychology does not prove the spiritual law. It describes certain observable behavioral and perceptual consequences of the same inner mechanisms that Murphy was describing from the spiritual side. The deeper claim that the subconscious mind is a channel for infinite intelligence, that the inner voice of accepted conviction participates in a creative process that extends beyond the individual behavioral apparatus into the larger fabric of providential circumstance? This is a claim that psychology, by its methods, cannot address. But what psychology can and does confirm is that the inner voice is not neutral, that its habitual content shapes perception, behavior, confidence, and outcome in demonstrable ways, and that deliberate, sustained change in the content and quality of inner speech produces measurable changes in these outcomes. For anyone who has wondered whether Murphy's teaching has any grounding outside of spiritual tradition, this is the grounding, not as proof of the whole, but as confirmation of the mechanism at the level that can be directly observed. The convergence of spiritual mechanism and psychological observation is itself a source of deep confidence for the serious student of this teaching. You are not being asked to take a leap into the irrational. You are being shown that two entirely different approaches to understanding the human mind, one rooted in the ancient wisdom of spiritual law, the other in the modern methods of behavioral and cognitive science, have arrived at complementary descriptions of the same operative reality. The inner voice shapes the world you inhabit. This is not a metaphor. It is a fact approached from two directions, confirmed by two bodies of evidence, and pointing toward one practical conclusion. The most important work you will ever do on your financial life is the work you do on the voice that creates it. Consider the story of a man, call him William, who had spent most of his adult life in a skilled trade. He was genuinely good at his work, and there had been times when income had been reasonable. But over the years, the financial picture had settled into a pattern of perpetual constraint. Bills got paid, barely. Nothing accumulated. Every time it seemed like things might improve, something would arise to level the ground again. William had read books on prosperity. He believed in the principles. But in his daily language, in the casual talk with his friends, in the jokes at the shop, in the way he talked to his wife about money, there was a consistent refrain. Money just doesn't stick to me. I'm hopeless with money. I'll always be working for someone else at this level. He said these things with the rueful smile of someone who had long ago accepted them as simply the truth about himself. What William had never examined was how this language was functioning in the invisible recording. He thought of it as honest self-appraisal. He thought of the jokes as harmless social currency. He did not see that every time he said, "Money just doesn't stick to me," especially with the slightly amused resignation that was its usual accompaniment, he was issuing a precise instruction to the creative medium of his subconscious mind. Not once, not occasionally, but regularly with emotional consistency across years. The subconscious, faithful to its nature, had been executing that instruction with perfect accuracy. Money was not sticking. The creative medium was building exactly what the dominant inner impression described. And the dominant inner impression had nothing to do with his morning affirmations, which he also practiced occasionally. It had everything to do with the habitual, emotionally loaded, daily language of his financial identity. When William began to genuinely examine this, not with self-condemnation, but with the clinical eye of a diagnostician, the degree to which the poverty language had saturated his financial inner world became clear. It was in every domain, in how he priced his work. He consistently undercharged, and the inner justification for the undercharging was always a version of "people won't pay more for what I do," in how he responded to referrals. When someone sent a new client his way, he would often minimize the encounter, not follow up with confidence, and ultimately lose the connection. The inner voice having whispered, before the opportunity even materialized, "This probably won't amount to anything," in how he engaged with financial planning. Every time he sat down to look at the larger picture, savings, investment, business growth, the inner voice would flood the space with helplessness, and he would close the conversation with himself after a few minutes, overwhelmed. The shift began when William committed, seriously and consistently, to one change. He chose a single statement from Murphy's teaching. "Infinite intelligence prospers me and guides my work." And he gave it the first and last place in every day. Before sleep, quietly, with as much of the feeling of settled truth as he could access. On waking, before anything else, the same statement with the same quality of calm. Throughout the day, whenever the poverty refrain arose, "Money just doesn't stick. I'm hopeless with this," he substituted, without drama and without effort, the same statement. He did not add 20 other affirmations. He did not create an elaborate ritual. He made one change, consistently, and gave it the time that the law requires. The outer changes that followed were not dramatic in the first weeks, but they were real. He noticed first a change in the quality of his inner state when financial matters arose. Less of the immediate contraction, less of the automatic reaching for the poverty refrain. He began to price his work more accurately, not because he had suddenly become more confident in a general sense, but because the internal conversation that used to undercut his pricing had become quieter. He began to follow up with referrals more consistently, and 2 of those follow-ups led to connections that opened new contracts. He sat down to look at the larger financial picture one evening, and instead of fleeing after 5 minutes, found himself, for the first time in years, genuinely engaging with the question of what was possible rather than cataloging what was blocked. These were not miracles. They were the natural behavioral consequences of a changed inner signal operating through a human being who was, incrementally but genuinely, becoming a different inner speaker about money. The story of William is not offered as proof of spiritual law. It is offered as an illustration of how the mechanism operates at the level of human experience that is most recognizable. The law does not announce itself. It does not produce dramatic sudden reversals that leave no room for alternative explanation. It works through the channels available, through change perception, change confidence, change follow-through, change willingness to accept opportunity, change pricing, change consistency, and these change behaviors, arising from a change inner signal, produce change outer results. Whether those results are understood as the natural behavioral consequences of a more empowering inner speech, or as the creative output of a subconscious mind aligned with infinite intelligence, the practical reality is identical. The voice changed. The results changed. The law operated precisely as Murphy described. The contrast between poverty voice and wealth voice is most clearly seen when the specific phrases are placed side by side. When the inner voice says, "Money never stays with me," it is not merely reporting a past experience. It is issuing a present tense decree about the ongoing nature of the person's relationship with financial supply. The subconscious hears it as a definition of current reality and builds accordingly, creating the perceptual blindness, the behavioral withdrawal, the subconscious avoidance of the very conditions that would allow money to circulate freely. When the inner voice says instead, "Money circulates through me in divine order," the instruction is entirely different. It places the speaker in a relationship with money that is characterized by movement, divine alignment, and naturalness. The subconscious receives the instruction of circulation, and the behavioral and perceptual consequences follow in correspondence. When the inner voice says, "I have no options," it does more than describe a temporary financial limitation. It forecloses the perceptual search for alternatives. A mind that has accepted the inner verdict of no options has quite literally stopped looking. The doors that might have been visible from a different inner position are invisible from this one. Not because they are absent, but because the primed perceptual system has been instructed not to find them. When the wealth voice says instead, "Infinite intelligence reveals the next right channel," the inner instruction is the opposite. It positions the mind in a state of active, open expectation, not anxious searching, but calm, attentive availability to the guidance that the creative intelligence of the subconscious mind, aligned with the universal principle of supply, is always in the process of revealing. The door does not become visible because the statement was spoken. It becomes visible because the inner authority that had sealed it shut has been withdrawn, and the attention that was turned inward in helplessness has been turned outward in available, guided action. These contrasts are not merely inspirational. They describe the actual mechanism by which the inner voice governs the perceptual and behavioral interface between the individual and the outer world. The poverty voice creates a closed system, a self-confirming loop in which the inner verdict of scarcity generates the behaviors and perceptual blindnesses that produce the outer conditions of scarcity, which then confirm the inner verdict, which deepens the program, which narrows the behavior further. The wealth voice creates an open system, a different loop in which the inner recognition of divine supply generates the confidence, the alertness, the follow-through, and the willingness to act on guidance that produce the outer encounters and opportunities that confirm and deepen the inner recognition. The same mechanism, the same creative medium, the same law, operating in opposite directions, producing opposite results, simply on the basis of which voice is given the authority of consistent, accepted, emotionally invested repetition. This is the practical geometry of the inner voice. It is not magic. It is not faith in the absence of reason. It is the rational, careful understanding of a mechanism that has been operating in your life from the beginning. One that has been producing results with perfect precision every single day, whether you understood it or not. What changes when you understand it is not the mechanism. The mechanism was already perfect. What changes is your relationship to it. You become, for the first time, its deliberate operator rather than its unconscious subject. You take up the position that Murphy described as the rightful position of the conscious mind. The watchman at the gate, the director of the inner speech, the deliberate designer of the impression that the most obedient creative medium in the universe will faithfully execute. That position is available to you right now, not in some future state of greater discipline or greater spiritual maturity. Right now, in this moment. With the next sentence, you speak to yourself about money. Let this understanding settle deeply. The voice that creates money is not a gift to be earned. It is an instrument already in your possession. It has been functioning throughout your entire financial life. The only question that has ever been at issue is whether you were directing it deliberately or allowing it to run on inherited programs. The moment you take conscious direction of that instrument, the moment you become the watchman, the speaker of the wealth voice, the deliberate impressor of divine supply upon the most creative medium available to a human being, the law begins to work for you with the same fidelity with which it has been working against you. Not because the law changed, because the instruction changed. And the instruction is yours to give. Everything in this teaching resolves into a single understanding, one that, when fully absorbed, renders the entire question of financial reality from a different angle than the one most people have been standing at for years. The voice that creates money is not the voice of volume. It is not the voice of eloquence, persuasion, demand, or even sincere prayer. It is the voice of inner authority, the voice of a mind that has taken up genuine residence in the accepted conviction of divine supply, that speaks from that position calmly and consistently, and that refuses to vacate that position in the face of outer conditions that contradict it. Volume produces noise, authority produces impression, and impression produces creation. This is the law. It has always been the law. And it operates with the same mathematical certainty whether you have understood it for a week or for 20 years. The entire architecture of Murphy's teaching points toward this inner authority as the operative power. Not the power of God petitioned from outside, not the power of positive thinking applied as a mood management strategy, but the power of a conscious mind that has understood its relationship to the subconscious creative medium and is deliberately operating that relationship with precision and consistency. The wealth voice is not a prayer asked in hope. It is an instruction issued in knowledge. The difference between those two positions is the entire difference between the teaching applied as inspiration and the teaching applied as law. Murphy lived and taught that difference for decades, and every student who moved from sincere hope to genuine result made exactly that transition, from the position of asking to the position of operating. Your subconscious mind is, right now, creating from its current dominant impression. That is not a theory. That is the operative condition of your life at this moment. The financial conditions you are currently living in are the visible correspondence of the inner voice that has been most consistently and emotionally active in the recording studio of your deep mind. This is not blame, it is diagnosis. And diagnosis is power. Because once you know precisely where the program is running and precisely what it is saying, you know exactly what to change, and you know the exact method by which to change it. Murphy gave you that method. It is not complicated. It is not available only to the spiritually advanced. It is available to any person who chooses, from this moment forward, to become the deliberate operator of the voice that creates their financial world. The key that unlocks this is not willpower. It is not effort. It is the single act of genuine understanding, the descent of this principle from the level of the intellect to the level of lived conviction. When you genuinely know, in the way you know your own name, that the subconscious mind is always recording, always creating, always building in precise correspondence with the dominant inner impression, and that the inner impression is entirely accessible to your deliberate direction, something shifts that no amount of forced positive thinking could produce. The shift is in the identity of the speaker. You stop being the person who is trying to change their circumstances and become the person who is operating the law that governs circumstances. That shift is not dramatic. It is quiet, it is settled, and it is permanent. The law does not forget. The subconscious does not lose track of what it has been given. Every deliberate impression of divine supply deposited into the deep mind through the practiced, accepted, consistently spoken wealth voice is recorded and accumulated. The recording does not erase between sessions. It builds. And as it builds, the dominant signal shifts, incrementally, patiently, inevitably, until the new impression is so deeply established that it is the natural inner position from which you speak about money, about supply, about what is possible, and about what infinite intelligence is in the process of providing. When that position is genuinely established, the outer world begins to change, not as a miracle requiring explanation, but as the natural, law-governed correspondence between the inner world that has been built and the outer world that must eventually reflect it. Your words are not empty. This is the first thing to carry forward from everything in this teaching. Every sentence you speak to yourself about money has been landing somewhere. Every casual remark, every resigned sigh, every automatic refrain of lack has been received by the most faithful and obedient creative medium in existence and acted upon with perfect precision. This is not meant to generate guilt about the past. The past cannot be changed, but it can be understood, and the understanding of what the past inner voice was creating is the foundation of the new authority with which the future inner voice will speak. You did not know what you were doing. Now you do, and that difference, or between not knowing and knowing, is the entire ground of transformation. Your inner speech is a mold, not a metaphor for a mold, a functional, operative mold, the shape into which the creative substance of the subconscious mind is poured, and from which the outer conditions of your financial life are cast. Murphy used the word mold deliberately because it captures the relationship between the inner pattern and the outer form with a precision that other metaphors do not. A mold determines the shape of what is cast in it with absolute certainty. The metal that fills the mold has no preference about what shape it takes. It takes the shape of the mold. The subconscious mind, as the creative medium filled by the impression of inner speech, takes the shape of whatever inner mold it has been given. Change the mold. Change the dominant impression by changing the inner speech with genuine acceptance and consistent repetition. And the substance that fills it will inevitably take the new shape. This is not aspiration. This is the nature of the creative process as Murphy understood and taught it. You have been speaking into the mold of your financial life every day of your adult life. The mold that currently exists was shaped by years of automatic inner speech, much of it inherited, most of it unconscious, and nearly all of it well below the level at which you have been directing your deliberate prosperity efforts. This teaching has given you the ability to see the mold clearly for the first time. Not the outer conditions. Those are the cast form. The mold, the inner speech that shaped it, and seeing the mold means you can now change it. Not by destroying it. You cannot undo the past impressions by force, but by beginning now to fill the inner space with a different impression, consistently and patiently, until the new mold is deeper than the old one, and the creative substance of the subconscious has been redirected into the new shape. Speak from supply long enough, and the subconscious begins to build a different world. This is the operational truth Murphy lived his life teaching. Not speak from supply, and eventually, if circumstances cooperate, something might change. Not speak from supply and feel better about your situation. Speak from supply long enough that with genuine acceptance, with consistent practice, with the calm authority of a person who understands the mechanism. And the subconscious must build a different world, because it is law, because the mechanism is impersonal and exact, because the creative medium responds to the dominant impression with the same faithfulness with which the earth responds to the seed. The same faithfulness with which mathematics responds to the equation, the same faithfulness with which the recording responds to the signal. You are not too old for this? This is the specific reassurance Murphy would have offered the person at this stage of life who has heard the teaching and felt beneath their interest the whispered fear that the years for this kind of shift have passed. Murphy's teaching makes no exception for age. The subconscious mind does not retire. Infinite intelligence does not have a cutoff date for provision. The creative medium is as responsive at 60 as at 25. Perhaps more so because the person who has lived through genuine struggle carries an emotional depth and a hard-won sincerity that can fuel the acceptance of the prosperity statement with a gravity that younger repetition cannot access. The person who has genuinely known lack knows without performance what supply would mean. That knowing, when it is turned from the direction of resignation toward the direction of divine recognition, becomes one of the most powerful forms of accepted conviction the subconscious can receive. The seasons of life that feel like missed harvest are not evidence that the law does not apply to you. They are evidence of what the dominant inner signal has been. Change the signal. Now today, with the practice outlined in this teaching, and the law that has been producing the current season begins to produce a different one. Not because time reverses, but because the subconscious, operating from a new dominant impression, begins to create new correspondence in the outer world. New channels opening, new opportunities becoming visible, new confidence arising in the specific domains where confidence was needed to change the financial picture. The harvest does not depend on your past. It depends on the current impression, and the current impression begins with the next sentence you speak to yourself about money. The wealth voice is not a performance. It is not a discipline to be maintained with gritted teeth until it produces results. At its deepest level, it is the return to the truth that Murphy believed was always present beneath the surface of human experience. The truth that infinite intelligence, which is the source of all supply, is not withholding from you. It is not waiting to see if you deserve it. It is not teaching you a lesson through financial struggle. It is always in principle and in potential, providing the substance of every good thing through the channel of the subconscious mind as that channel is opened by the accepted conviction of supply. The poverty voice has been closing the channel. The wealth voice opens it. This is not complicated theology. It is the simple operational truth of the mechanism Murphy spent his life illuminating. The invitation now is not to try this or consider this. The invitation is to make the transition that this teaching has been preparing, from unconscious subject of the inner voice to deliberate operator of it, from the position of the person who has been creating their financial reality by accident to the position of the person who creates it by design, from the vocabulary of scarcity to the vocabulary of divine supply, from the habitual poverty refrain to the chosen, consistent, calmly authoritative prosperity statement that, spoken from the position of accepted conviction, impresses the subconscious with the instruction from which a different financial world must be built. This transition is available to you right now. It costs nothing except awareness and consistent practice, and it is governed by a law that does not fail. Here is the challenge that this teaching asks you to accept. Not someday, now. For the next 7 days, every time a poverty sentence rises in your inner voice, every time the automatic refrain of, "I cannot afford it," "Money never stays," "There is no way," "I am always behind" begins to form, you do not complete it. You redirect it. Calmly, without drama, without the emotional effort of suppression, you substitute one calm statement of divine supply. The statement does not need to be elaborate. It does not need to be long. It needs to be accepted, spoken from the inner position of recognized law rather than anxious petition. Infinite intelligence prospers me now. Supply is unfolding through right channels. I am guided to the right action at the right time. Choose the one that resonates. Give it the 7 days. Give it the threshold moments of sleep and waking. Give it the redirection whenever the poverty sentence arises. This is the Wealth Voice Challenge, and it is not a motivational exercise. It is the application of the exact mechanism this teaching has described. 7 days is not a sufficient period to complete the subconscious re-impression that the full practice produces. Murphy would have been the first to say so. But it is a sufficient period to establish the practice as a living reality in your daily experience, to discover from the inside the difference between a day governed by the automatic poverty voice and a day in which the wealth voice has been deliberately and consistently practiced. That difference is itself a form of evidence, not proof of the law in a philosophical sense, but lived confirmation of the mechanism. The recognition that the inner state changes, the perceptual field shifts, the behavioral confidence adjusts, and the quality of the day is genuinely different when the inner signal has been placed under conscious direction. 7 days will give you that evidence. And evidence in Murphy's system is the strongest possible foundation for the deeper conviction that makes the practice permanent. If this teaching has landed in you as more than information, if it has named a mechanism you have been living inside without knowing its name for years, then do one more thing before this practice begins. Subscribe to this channel, not as a favor, not as a social gesture, as a declaration, the declaration of a person who has recognized that the curriculum of law requires sustained, sequenced engagement. What is taught in this space builds on itself. It is not a collection of isolated inspirational pieces. It is a systematic illumination of the operating principles of the subconscious mind, consciousness, spiritual law, and the invisible architecture of the conditions of your life. To receive it occasionally by accident is to apply the law of accident to your own spiritual initiation. Remain, subscribe. Let this curriculum do what a curriculum does. Build on itself, deepen the understanding, and carry the teaching from the level of the intellect to the level of the bone. Now there is a final act, one that will seal this understanding more permanently than any note you could take, more deeply than any technique you could begin practicing tonight. Think of one moment in your life, one specific moment, where the mechanism described in this teaching was already operating. A time when your inner speech about money, whatever it was saying, was producing a visible outer result that matched it with uncanny precision. A time when you changed something in how you spoke or thought about a financial situation, and the outer situation shifted. A time when you heard yourself say the poverty sentence and recognized, even then, something in you that knew. It does not matter whether the example is of the law working for you or the law working against you. What matters is that it was the law. Write that moment below, not for this channel, not as a comment, as a testimony to yourself, the testimony of a mind that can now see the law operating in its own history. Because the mind that can identify the law in the past has just acquired the capacity to operate it in the future. That recognition is not the end of this teaching. It is the beginning of mastery.